You're about to witness a story that shook a whole town to its core. At a dusty auction barn in rural Wyoming, a scarred black Mustang stood seconds away from being sold for meat, until a boy who barely spoke raised his trembling hand. What happened next didn't just save a horse. It unearthed buried secrets, sparked a small-town rebellion, and proved that sometimes the quietest voices carry the greatest weight. The Gallo barn creaked under the weight of wind and time. Nestled at the edge of Red Willow County, Wyoming, it had once been proud, alive with cheers and hoofbeats during the harvest auction. Now the banners flapped like torn memories, and the dust hung in the air like grief that never settled. Rusted hinges groaned when doors moved, and inside, the only things that still remembered life were the animals. Eli Turner moved like he didn't want to be noticed. His boots barely made a sound on the dirt floor. At 13, he was all elbows and silent thoughts, trailing behind his grandfather like a shadow. Joe Turner stooped, sun-leathered, hands calloused, from decades of fixing fences and rusted hinges, barely noticed when Eli slowed to a stop. "Stay close, son," Joe muttered, without turning. "Ain't the kind of place for wandering." But Eli had already stopped, drawn by something beyond the line of stalls and half-hearted biddings. He slipped past the edge of the main corridor and into the older section of the barn where the lights flickered and no one swept any more. There, in the farthest pen, stood the creature. Mustang, black as midnight, with scars that crisscrossed his flanks like barbed wire etched in flesh. His tag read 17A in red chalk above the gate. He didn't move, not even when Eli approached. His eyes were not wild, not afraid, just empty, as though whatever spirit had once filled him had long since left. The boy gripped the edge of the pen, his breath shallow. He didn't speak. He rarely did any more. After the accident, last spring, the one that took his father and left Eli with nights of silence and a stammer too cruel to name words, had become unreliable things. But he didn't need words here. He could feel something in his chest, low and electric, as if the still air between him and the Mustang was charged with memory. "Nightfall," someone had scrawled faintly on the wooden slat beneath the number. The name wasn't official. It had been whispered, maybe once, by someone who still believed in naming lost things. Nightfall's ears flicked. He turned, slow and deliberate, locking eyes with the boy. Eli didn't blink. Something passed between them, not magic, not miracle, something older, the kind of knowing that doesn't ask for permission. From behind a clipboard across the aisle, Cassidy Lynn paused, her pen freezing mid-tally. She had seen wild horses before, broken horses too. She had worked enough auctions to know how this ended. The ones in the back row with too many scars, no papers, no buyers, they didn't leave in trailers. They left in trucks, big ones, bound south. But this horse, this moment, she watched as Eli stepped forward, his small hand curling around the edge of the gate. Nightfall lowered his head, slow, almost reluctant. Then he took one step forward, just one, and let his muzzle brush the wood inches from the boy's knuckles. Cassidy dropped her pen. It clattered on the concrete, too loud for a barn used to stillness. Eli didn't flinch. Behind them, the loudspeaker cracked to life. "Lot 17A," came the drawl of Merton Clay, owner and overseer of Gallo Barn. His voice held no poetry. "To be moved to back pen for slaughter queue." The word fell like a stone. Cassidy's brows furrowed. She looked at the gate, then at Eli. The boy wasn't moving. And neither was the horse. From the corner, Sheriff Waylon Brooks sipped his coffee, uninterested. His duty was crowd control, not redemption. He saw a kid too close to a dangerous animal and took a step forward. But then Nightfall moved again. Not toward Eli, toward the gate, toward the boy. Eli didn't move away. He did something no one would expect from a kid who hadn't spoken in public for months. He reached out and touched the Mustang's neck. Nightfall's muscles shivered under the contact, but he didn't bolt. He didn't snap. Instead, he leaned into it. Cassidy blinked, unsure if she should call someone or just stand there and let it happen. Joe Turner's voice cut through the still air. "Eli?" The boy turned his head slowly. Joe was coming down the aisle, brow drawn in confusion, but when he saw what was happening, he stopped. "Boy, step away. That one ain't right. They said it hurt a man bad last week. Almost took a handler's arm." Eli didn't answer. His hand still rested on Nightfall's neck. The horse was breathing slowly now, eyes not wild but distant, like he had been waiting for this boy all along. "I said move away, Eli." Joe's voice rose, still no response. Cassidy stepped forward then, quiet but quick. She placed a hand on Joe's arm. "Wait, just look." Joe looked again, and for a man who didn't believe in much besides fixing fences and keeping your head down, something shifted in his face. Eli finally stepped back. Not out of fear, but as if he had just finished a conversation without words. Nightfall didn't chase, didn't snap. He simply watched him, ears forward. Cassidy cleared her throat. "That horse, he's not listed as rideable, but did you see that?" Joe shook his head slowly. "I saw. Doesn't make sense." "Maybe not," she said, "but I'm not writing him off just yet." From the loudspeaker again. "Final notice, 17A. Buyer declined. Moving to processor list." Cassidy glanced at her watch, then back at the boy. "Come on, Eli," Joe finally said. "We ain't got the money for another mouth." Eli hesitated. He looked at the horse once more, then followed his grandfather without a word. But as they turned the corner, Nightfall stepped forward, pressed his nose to the gate, and let out a sound, not a whinny, not a snort. A low, broken thing, like grief remembered. Behind them, Cassidy walked back to the office. She picked up the clipboard she had dropped, and for the first time in years, she scratched out a red line. Next to Lot Subait A, she wrote a single word: pending. The next morning came pale and quiet, with the low hum of Wyoming wind whispering against the eaves of the Turner farmhouse. Eli sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched plate in front of him. 2 eggs, scrambled, just like his grandfather made every morning. But he wasn't hungry. Not after yesterday. Joe Turner folded the newspaper with a grunt and leaned back in his chair. Auction's still on today. Should finish clearing out the last row by noon. Then we head back, fix that broken corner of the Jenkins fence. Eli didn't answer. He didn't need to. Joe could see the look in his grandson's eyes, half distant, half defiant. "No," Joe said plainly. "Don't ask." Eli glanced up, meeting his grandfather's eyes. He didn't speak. He simply blinked. Joe sighed. "That horse? That one from yesterday. He's not ours. We can't afford to bring home trouble. You saw the tag. Slaughter list. Ain't nobody bidding for that one." Eli's fork scraped against the plate. The eggs remained untouched. "I know you liked him," Joe continued, voice softer. "But not every broken thing needs fixin', son. Some things, they're meant to go." Eli swallowed hard, not because of food, but he didn't argue. He simply rose, picked up his backpack, and headed for the door. Joe watched him go, then muttered under his breath, "Same damn look your father used to get." Back at the Gallo barn, the auction buzzed with last-day energy. Men leaned against gates, sipping coffee from thermoses, while women sorted paperwork and kids ran around, chasing each other with sticks. The crowd was smaller than opening day, but the tension still hovered like dust in the rafters. Cassidy Lynn stood outside the holding pen with a clipboard tucked beneath one arm, trying to look busy while her mind spun in quiet revolt. Nightfall, she still couldn't bring herself to call him 17A, was standing in the same corner where he'd been yesterday. But something in his posture was different. His head was higher, his eyes followed movement, like he was listening for something or someone. She checked the tag again. The name Loyal's Echo kept looping in her mind. It wasn't proof, but it was something. "Cass," came a voice from behind her. It was Merton Clay, squinting in the sun, looking more agitated than usual. "That black Mustang, he's still here?" She nodded slowly. "Pending status. There's interest." "Interest?" Merton snorted. "The hell kind of interest?" Kid brushed his nose, and now he's a therapy horse? Cassidy held her ground. "We shouldn't rush to load him up for slaughter. Something's off." "Yeah," Merton said, stepping closer. "What's off is we're wasting time. I've got a buyer lined up in El Paso. They'll take him for parts. No questions asked." Cassidy looked away, jaw tightening. "There's a process." Merton grunted. "Fine, run your little process. But if no one bids today, he's gone." He walked off, boots kicking gravel. Eli had slipped away. He told his grandfather he was using the restroom, then disappeared behind the barn, circled around the back, and entered through the side storage door that never latched right. He knew that place better than most grown men did. His father used to fix things there: bolts, hinges, panels. Eli remembered the way he used to hum while he worked, low and off-key. Now, in that same quiet space, Eli moved like a whisper. He held something wrapped in a napkin half of a cornbread muffin he'd pocketed from breakfast. Nightfall stood alone in the pen, still tagged, still waiting. The other pens were nearly empty now. Some horses already loaded, others milling in confusion. Eli crouched beside the slats, slipped the muffin through a gap. Nightfall didn't eat it. But he leaned forward, nostrils flaring, head cocked slightly, recognizing the scent. The boy reached out, fingers brushing coarse hair again. "You remember me," he whispered, barely more than air. "Don't you?" The Mustang didn't answer, but he didn't retreat either, and that was enough. From the shadows, Cassidy watched the whole thing unfold. Later that morning, the crowd gathered once more inside the barn's center ring. The air was louder now, bidders calling out, prices slapping back and forth across the sawdust floor like playing cards in a windstorm. Lot 17A was up. Cassidy stood beside Merton, arms crossed, clipboard ready. Sheriff Waylon Brooks lingered near the back, pretending not to care, but his eyes tracked the black Mustang like a hawk. Nightfall was led into the ring by a handler with thick gloves and a short rope, but the moment he stepped inside, he pulled up short and stood like a statue. No bucks, no rearing, just waiting. Merton raised his gavel. Lot 17A, male Mustang, unbroke, scarred, previously classified as aggressive, starting at $1. Silence. No bids. Merton scanned the crowd. "Anyone?" More silence. A cough. The sound of boots shifting. Then, from the very back, a voice cracked through the air. 30 cents! Heads turned. People craned their necks. Eli stood, hand half raised, voice trembling. His ears burned red. Cassidy's breath caught. Merton laughed, short and mean. "Son, this isn't a game. You can't bid." Eli opened his mouth, but the stammer betrayed him. Nothing came out. Cassidy stepped forward. "Who's backing him?" Merton barked. "He's underage." "I am," came a voice from the side. Joe Turner pushed through the crowd, face grim. "I'll back him, with my name, my word, and what's left of my checkbook." The barn fell quiet. Merton hesitated, then scoffed. "Fine, 30 cents. Do I hear 40? No one spoke. Merton let the silence stretch. "Sold!" he said finally, slamming the gavel. Cassidy scribbled furiously. Merton shook his head. "Damn waste," he muttered. But Eli didn't care. He stepped forward as Nightfall turned his head slowly toward him, and something passed again, just like the day before. Cassidy moved beside them, whispering, "That's not just any horse, is it?" Eli didn't answer. He reached up and unfastened the tag from the halter. The number fluttered to the ground. and Nightfall, the horse they'd priced at 30 cents, stood tall and still beside the boy who'd had no right to bid, and did anyway. It was nearly midnight when the Turner truck pulled into the drive, its headlights washing over the aging slats of the barn behind their home. The wind had picked up, sharp and dry, blowing dust across the gravel as Joe cut the engine and stepped out. Eli climbed down from the passenger side, silent as ever, holding the lead rope of the horse that shouldn't have been his. Nightfall didn't resist. He stepped off the trailer with quiet dignity, his eyes scanning the dim world like he already knew it. Eli walked beside him, hand barely gripping the rope, not guiding the Mustang but walking with him, as though the horse had already chosen where he would go. Joe scratched the back of his neck. "Don't get attached," he muttered. "He may not stay." But even as he said it, he stepped into the barn and cleared a stall. The next morning, Cassidy Lind sat cross-legged on the floor of her cramped office. A ring of manila folders spread around her like a crime scene. Her desk was stacked high with auction reports, USDA logs, and livestock transfer records dating back over 6 years. The overhead light flickered, humming a faint protest with each surge of electricity. Nightfall, she couldn't call him 17A anymore. Not after what she'd seen was bothering her. Not because of what he'd done, but because of who he might be. She remembered him, or thought she did. It was 5 years ago, the Tri-County Fair in Torrington. She was volunteering with a local rescue nonprofit. One horse had drawn all the kids gleaming black, elegant, responsive to finger snaps and whispered commands. Loyal's Echo. She hadn't thought of that name in years. Her fingers flipped through the documents, eyes scanning signatures, stamps, and registry numbers. She found a familiar brand code, faded on a photocopy, R-C, Zone 139. She checked it against Nightfall's intake file. Match. But something else caught her attention. The owner listed in the transfer log, Lance Delroy, former rancher and disgraced local figure. He was the man whose horse breeding operation burned to the ground the same summer Echo disappeared. His file showed a rushed transfer request, approved days after the fire, no photos, no vet report, just a sheriff's signature. Sheriff Waylon Brooks. Cassidy leaned back slowly. "Damn," she whispered. "They buried him." Back at the Turner farm, Joe finished reinforcing the fencing around the temporary pen, throwing down hay while mumbling about responsibility and too many mouths to feed. Nightfall ignored him. The horse had barely eaten, sniffing at oats like they were foreign. But when Eli approached, he perked up. The boy didn't speak, just stood beside the stall, hands resting on the rail. Nightfall shifted closer, inch by inch, until their shadows merged. Joe watched from the porch, arms folded. "I know that look," he muttered to himself. "Same damn one your father gave a stray mutt when he was 10. Fed it biscuits under the table for a week before I gave in." A gust of wind rattled the porch screen. Joe exhaled. "You're just like him." That afternoon, Cassidy drove down a cracked county road bordered by cottonwoods and rusted fence posts. She'd heard that Emma Delroy Lance's daughter had returned to Red Willow under an assumed name, living off the grid, somewhere past the edge of town. Most people believed she'd left the state after the fire, but Cassidy had a hunch. And she knew where to look. She found the trailer tucked behind a small rise, its silver siding dulled by sun and years of wind. A lean-to covered in old tarps shielded a water tank and a folding table with feed bags. Horseshoes were nailed above the door in an uneven arch. Emma opened it before Cassidy could knock. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with dust, eyes hardened by time. But Cassidy recognized her instantly. "You're not supposed to know I'm here," Emma said. "I know," Cassidy replied, "but I think one of your horses just walked back into town." Emma stared. "He's called Nightfall now," Cassidy continued. but he's got a brand that matches Loyal's echo." And he bowed to a boy like he recognized him. Emma's hand went to her chest, fingers curling over her shirt. "You're lying." Cassidy reached into her bag, pulling out a worn, laminated photo. It showed a younger Emma standing beside a boy in a wheelchair, his hand touching the muzzle of a black Mustang. Emma stared at it for a long time. "My brother," she whispered. "He never spoke to anyone. But that horse." She looked up. Echo disappeared the night of the fire. "Dad told everyone he sold him, but I knew that was a lie." "Do you remember who showed up first?" Cassidy asked gently. Emma's jaw tightened. "Sheriff Brooks. He said the fire was an accident, but he never looked me in the eye." Cassidy nodded. "The transfer papers were signed by him. The only file we have left is forged. I think your dad cut a deal to cover up what really happened." Emma's eyes burned. "I want to see him." That night the wind howled louder. Joe had gone to bed early, but Eli stayed up, sitting on the steps of the barn. Nightfall rested in his stall, breathing slow and steady. Something about the horse's presence calmed the boy like he could lean into silence without drowning in it. The stars were sharp, wind sharper, but the stillness was interrupted by a faint click. Eli turned. A shadow moved behind the barn. He rose quietly, stepping down onto the gravel barefoot. The sound came again, a clink of metal, a quiet creak. He turned the corner just in time to see a figure in a dark jacket crouched near the stall gate, a wire cutter glinting in the moonlight. "Hey!" Eli yelled, the words strangled by instinct but still loud. The figure looked up startled, face obscured, then took off running. Eli gave chase for 3 steps before tripping over a bale hook in the dirt. He hit the ground hard, knees scraping against gravel. From inside the barn, Nightfall let out a deep, snarling snort. Joe was out the door in seconds, shotgun in hand. "Eli!" Cassidy's truck peeled up the drive just as he shouted. "What the hell's going on?" she called out, jumping out with her flashlight. They scanned the field. The figure was gone. But the gate to Nightfall's stall was open. And yet, the Mustang hadn't left. He stood in the middle of the pen, eyes alert, body tense-like. He'd known the danger and chosen to stay. Cassidy stepped into the light, breath visible in the cold. "There's boot prints," she said. "Military-style treads. That wasn't a thief." Joe helped Eli to his feet. "You okay?" Eli nodded, wincing. Cassidy looked toward the barn. "That horse isn't just a lost file. Somebody wants him gone." She turned to Joe. "We need to talk, all of us." Joe looked down at his grandson, then back at Nightfall. "Fine," he said, "but not out here." He opened the barn door wide, ushering them inside. Cassidy stepped in last, flashlight still glowing. The beam caught on Nightfall's face, and for a second, just a second, she saw something ancient in his eyes. Not fear, not fight, recognition. The storm rolled in slow, that morning gray cloud stretching across the horizon like pulled cotton, heavy with something unsaid. By the time Cassidy parked her truck beside the Turner barn, the air was thick and humid. Emma Delroy sat beside her in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead like the past was waiting just beyond the windshield. She hadn't spoken much since last night. "You okay?" Cassidy asked, killing the engine. Emma didn't answer at first. Her fingers were trembling slightly, resting on the frayed hem of her denim jacket. "I haven't seen him since the night my brother died," she finally said. "If it's really Echo, I don't know what I'll do." Cassidy gave a nod that said more than words. "Come on." Inside the barn, Eli was already there. He had arrived before even his grandfather woke up, crouched beside Nightfall's stall with a brush in his hand and a quiet steadiness in his body. He wasn't brushing the horse, not yet, just letting the bristles rest against the black fur, waiting until the Mustang gave permission. Nightfall stood still, watching him, alert but calm. Joe was on the porch, coffee in one hand, a cigarette in the other. He squinted as Cassidy and Emma approached. "You bring ghosts with you?" he asked, not unkindly. Emma stopped short at the stall. The moment she saw the horse, the name escaped her lips in a whisper. Echo. Nightfall turned. His ears flicked, his nostrils flared. He took a single step toward her. Emma clapped a hand over her mouth, stumbling back. "It is him." Cassidy moved closer, her voice low. "How can you tell?" Emma reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of cloth, an old halter, cracked and sun-faded, with a brass nameplate still attached. The name, barely legible, Loyal's Echo. She held it out toward the horse. "Echo," she said again, voice trembling. "It's me, Emma." Nightfall didn't react to the name. He simply stared at her. Emma stepped closer and lifted the halter. "Remember this? It was yours." Still no reaction. She tried an old whistle, 2 short bursts, a soft hum, a command her brother used to give. Nothing. Her shoulders dropped. But then Eli stood up. He didn't say anything. He simply stepped forward, placed his palm against the horse's chest, and closed his eyes. The stall went still. Nightfall blinked. His muscles shivered under the boy's touch. Emma watched, her breath caught in her throat. And then, slowly, Nightfall lowered his head. Not in fear, not in submission, in memory. He turned his muzzle into Eli's shoulder and let out a soft, low breath. A sound that wasn't a whinny, wasn't a sigh. It was a wordless yes. Emma gasped. "How?" Cassidy stepped beside her. "He speaks in silence." Emma moved forward again, slowly, and reached out. This time the horse didn't back away. Her fingers brushed against his jaw, just beneath the scar that ran from ear to cheek, one he'd gotten during the fire. "He didn't die," she whispered. "He was taken." Later that afternoon, the 5 of them sat in the kitchen. Joe, Eli, Cassidy, Emma, and the horse just outside the window, grazing near the fence like he belonged there all along. Cassidy had spread the documents across the table-burned corners, mismatched dates, forged signatures. Joe grunted. "Brooks signed off on this?" Cassidy nodded. "Same day as the fire, less than 24 hours after it burned down. No vet check, no proof of transfer. Just a sheriff's seal. And a missing horse." Emma added, "My dad said Echo ran off, injured, but the fence was locked. The stall was latched from the outside. I didn't question it. I was 17, scared. After my brother died, I just shut everything out." Joe looked at Eli, then back at Emma. "You think Brooks was covering for your old man?" "I don't know," Emma admitted, "but I know he didn't care what happened to Echo. Someone wanted him gone." Cassidy leaned forward. "He's here now. And if what we suspect is true, Sheriff Brooks helped forge that paperwork to move a living animal into the slaughter stream. That's not just a mistake. That's criminal neglect." Joe ran a hand through his thinning hair. "So what do we do?" Cassidy looked at Eli. "We let him decide." They went outside. Emma brought the old halter. She tried to fasten it over Echo's head, but the horse backed away, muscles stiff. Cassidy stepped in. "Maybe let him come to it." Emma dropped the halter to the ground. Echo sniffed it, then stepped around it, straight to Eli. The boy lifted his hand, flat-palmed. Echo pressed into it like it was the only thing holding him to the earth. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "He doesn't trust me." Cassidy put a hand on her shoulder. "Not yet, but he doesn't fear you either. That's something." Joe called from the porch. "Got company." They turned. A dusty black SUV rolled up the drive. Sheriff Brooks. He stepped out slow, wearing mirrored shades and his signature smugness. Heard there was a stir at the auction. Thought I'd check in. Cassidy crossed her arms. Bit late for a curiosity, don't you think? Brooks smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Just making sure everyone's playing by the rules. Emma stepped forward. You remember Echo? Brooks didn't flinch. Can't say I do. Strange, she said. You signed his transfer the day after our barn burned down. He raised a brow. You got proof? Cassidy held up a file folder. We do. Copies of the brand, date logs, nameplate, and witnesses. Brooks scoffed. What are you going to do? File a complaint? That horse was unregistered after the fire. As far as the system knows, he didn't exist. Eli stepped forward then, face flushed, fists clenched at his sides. He didn't speak. He just raised his hands and signed. You knew. Brooks blinked. Cassidy translated aloud. He says you knew the horse. You left him behind. Emma added, just like you left my brother in that fire. Brooks's jaw tightened. Careful now. Joe stepped in. You're not going to threaten a bunch of folks standing on their own land. Not today. Echo let out a low sound, hooves shifting. Brooks turned toward him, and for the first time he looked nervous. That horse isn't worth the trouble, he muttered. Cassidy took a step closer. To you, maybe not, but to us, he's worth everything. Brooks got back in his SUV, slamming the door harder than necessary. As he pulled away, the wind picked up again. Emma walked to Eli and knelt beside him. You saved him, she whispered. You brought him back to life. Eli looked at the horse, then at her, and nodded. Not because he was proud, but because it was the truth. The Red Willow Town Hall hadn't seen a crowd like this since the county voted to ban fracking in 2011. Farmers in sun-faded denim rubbed elbows with retirees in pressed flannel. Teenagers whispered across pew-like benches while councilmen adjusted their neckties with nervous hands. And yet, among them all, the quietest figure in the room held more weight than anyone else. Eli sat on the edge of the front row bench, feet barely touching the floor, his hands clasped tight in his lap. His eyes didn't stray from the double doors at the back of the room. Hope or Echo, or whatever name this town would finally agree upon, stood just beyond them. His black coat glistening in the mid-morning sun, head held high, as if he knew this whole hearing was about him. Meeting will come to order, barked Council Chair Miriam Deeks, her gavel cracking the hush. Cassidy Lynn stood from her seat and stepped forward. She held a leather folder in her arms like it was the final nail in someone's coffin. My name is Cassidy Lynn, she began. I was employed by the State Livestock Inspection Bureau and am now acting as a citizen advocate. I bring forward evidence that a Mustang stallion once registered as Loyal's Echo was fraudulently transferred for slaughter following the Red Willow barn fire in 2017. The room stirred. Within these pages, she continued, are copies of original ownership documents, brand photographs, medical logs, and most damningly a signed sheriff's order transferring ownership within 24 hours of the barn fire, despite no vet exam and no survivor report. Someone in the crowd muttered, that can't be legal. Exactly, Cassidy said, without missing a beat. She turned toward the front row. Emma Delroy stood, eyes resolute. My father never sold Echo, she said. After the fire, Sheriff Brooks told us Echo died from his injuries. We were grieving, we believed him, but we never saw a body. And the documents. She held up a scorched envelope. This came from our attic last week. My little brother had saved it. It had the halter tag with the nameplate. It matches the one the horse is wearing right now. Councilwoman Deeks narrowed her eyes. And you're certain this is the same horse? Ask him yourself, Emma said. Eli rose slowly. The room held its breath. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He walked down the aisle, shoulders tight, and opened the doors. Echo stood there, tethered lightly to a fence post, calm as a moonless night. Eli untied the rope. The horse didn't bolt. He followed. Into the town hall. The wood floor echoed with each hoofstep. People leaned back instinctively, stunned by the quiet power of the moment. Cassidy turned to Deeks. "This is the horse that was left for dead, sold for 30 cents at the Gallow Barn auction." Echo stopped at Eli's side. Without a word, the boy raised his right hand and signed. "You left him." The whole room froze. Cassidy translated. "He says the sheriff left the horse behind, knowingly." And then Eli added another sign, slow and sharp. "You lied." Whispers shot through the audience like sparks through dry grass. The doors opened again unexpectedly. An old man stepped forward, limping slightly, a brimmed hat pulled low. Orville Jennings, former stable hand at the Delroy Ranch. "I was there the night of the fire," he croaked. "I told Brooks Echo was still alive, pinned in the back stall. He told me to forget it." Gasps. Chairwoman Deeks pounded the gavel again, voice shaky. "Sheriff Brooks has been asked to appear. Is he present?" A beat. Then boots, slow, heavy. Sheriff Waylon Brooks pushed through the back. Hat low. Eyes shadowed, but not enough to hide the look of a man caught. "I was acting under the assumption the animal was beyond saving," he said. "And yes, I approved the transfer. The paperwork was messy, but I did what I thought was best." "You signed a horse into slaughter," Emma snapped. "For 30 cents, Cassidy added. Brooks's voice rose. "It was a horse, not a person." A silence fell that seemed to stretch for minutes. Then Eli stepped forward, trembling with something too deep for words. He raised both hands and slowly signed, "He is someone." Echo stepped in front of him. Didn't rear, didn't snarl. He simply stood between the boy and the sheriff. The symbolism was lost on no one. Outside, the sky had darkened. Thunder rumbled somewhere north, but it held back, like even nature was waiting for a verdict. Chairwoman Deeks exited the building with 2 papers in hand, one a suspension notice, the other an investigation order. Brooks was escorted to his SUV by 2 deputies. Emma turned toward Cassidy. "Will it be enough?" Cassidy watched as Eli led Echo into the field behind the hall. "It has to be." Joe Turner approached his grandson, placing a weathered hand on his shoulder. "You did good, boy. Your daddy'd be proud." Eli didn't speak. He just looked up, eyes shining, and nodded. He reached into the saddlebag Emma had brought and pulled out the old halter Echo's halter. This time the horse didn't flinch. He bent his head, let Eli place it over him. And then, when no one was looking, Eli whispered, "Hope." The Mustang flicked an ear and didn't walk away. Rain hadn't come yet, but the sky over Red Willow carried the weight of it. That kind of heavy quiet before a storm, where even the grass stands still, listening. Cassidy stood by her truck outside the old Turner property, watching Eli and the black Mustang move together through the fence-line pasture like wind and shadow. The boy didn't use a lead rope anymore. He didn't need to. The horse simply followed. Emma Delroy leaned on the gate beside her, a loose denim shirt hanging from her shoulders like a memory of the girl she once was. Her face was different now, older, yes, but not just in years, in truths, in grief, finally unburied. "They said the sheriff's being investigated by the state board," Emma said quietly. Cassidy nodded. "They'll find enough. And if they don't, I'll give them what they missed." A pause. Then Emma added, "I found my brother's journal in an old tin box under the porch. He wrote about Echo every day, called him his best friend, said Echo didn't need to be broken, just needed someone who understood silence." Cassidy looked across the field at Eli. The boy wasn't talking. still kept most words to himself, but now there was a softness in his shoulders, a rhythm in his steps. He was coming back, not to what he was, but to who he was meant to become. Behind them, Joe Turner walked out of the barn carrying something wrapped in oilcloth. He handed it to Eli without ceremony. The boy unwrapped it slowly. It was a cowboy hat. Old. The leather worn, brim slightly curled. Joe cleared his throat. "It was your daddy's. Figured it was about time you had it." Eli looked up at his grandfather, then back at the hat. He didn't say thank you, but he didn't need to. He just placed it on his head and grinned. Later that day, Cassidy got a call. Orville Jennings had found something in his attic, a lockbox from the old ranch, sealed since before the fire. Inside was a stack of photographs, some charred at the corners, others pristine. All of them showed Echo, as a colt, with Emma's younger brother riding bareback across summer fields, with Emma herself teaching him to bow, and one photograph that made Cassidy's breath catch Echo in a parade at the Tri-County Fair, decked in silver tack, head high and eyes proud. The horse hadn't just been loved. He had been legendary. They submitted the photos to the investigation. That sealed it. Echo, now legally recognized again as Loyal's Echo, had been stolen through falsified papers and sold illegally under Sheriff Waylon Brooks' watch. The sheriff's resignation came quietly. No press conference, no denial, just a one-line letter delivered to the county office. Days passed. The sky finally cracked open, blessing the land with a slow, steady rain. And under that soft drizzle, something new began. Emma reopened the Delroy Ranch, not as a breeding facility, not as a showground, but as a sanctuary. Hope Haven, she called it, a place for horses that had been cast aside, abused, forgotten, and a place for kids like Eli. The first week, 5 horses arrived, 2 skittish mares from an overrun rescue shelter, 1 gelding with an eye clouded by trauma, a Shetland pony no one had patience for, and a 3-legged mule named Jasper. Eli helped with every single one. Didn't talk, but he showed up, carried feed buckets, sat still in the stalls, whispered things to them no one else could hear. And of course, Hope Once Echo was always nearby. Wherever Eli was, the horse wasn't far. At night, Cassidy would sometimes stop by, her boots tracking mud across the porch. Joe would hand her coffee in an old chipped mug that smelled faintly of motor oil. "You ever think," he said one night, "that boy's got horse blood in him?" Cassidy chuckled. "No, but I think that horse has something human in him." Joe didn't disagree, just stared out into the field where Eli and Hope moved together under the moonlight, both of them finally belonging to something larger than sorrow. The media came calling, of course. A local news station sent a reporter who wanted a photo of the boy and the horse for their One Good Thing segment. Cassidy turned them away. "This ain't a story to sell," she told them. "It's a story to keep." Emma agreed. They didn't want clicks. They wanted peace. And in time, Red Willow moved on. Not forgetting, but transforming. The Gallowo barn, where Hope had been auctioned off for 30 cents, was shut down for violations and later purchased by a group of horse welfare volunteers. They turned it into a learning center for local schools. Sheriff Brooks left town. No one asked where he went. No one missed him. But people remembered the boy. And the horse. They came to visit, brought apples, sat quietly on the fence posts, and just watched. And sometimes, when the light was right and the wind soft, Hope would lift his head and nicker gently at the horizon, as if remembering something long ago, but not with pain. With peace. And Eli? He still didn't say much, but he laughed now, smiled easy. And when he walked like he knew the earth beneath his feet was solid, safe, Because it was. The grass had turned greener since the rains. It rolled out across the Delroy property like a living sea, swaying gently beneath the Wyoming sky. The barn smelled of fresh hay, oiled leather, and possibility. They had named the place Hope Haven. But no one really talked about why. Not aloud. Everyone already knew. Eli stood barefoot in the pasture that morning, the dew soaking through the hem of his jeans. He wore the old cowboy hat his grandfather gave him. Too big. Still, but it sat proud on his head like it belonged there. And it did. Across from him stood the black Mustang, still scarred, still imperfect. But something in him had changed. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was choosing to stay. The kids from the elementary school lined the edge of the fence, whispering excitedly. Most had never seen a Mustang up close before, let alone one that had once stood on the edge of slaughter. Mrs. Barnett, their teacher, clapped her hands. "All right, y'all, this is Eli Turner, and this is Hope. He was rescued right here in Red Willow, saved by someone who saw something worth saving." The kids leaned in. Eli didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Hope took a step forward, unled, uncoaxed, and made a slow, deliberate circle around Eli. The boy reached out a hand, and the horse pressed his head into the boy's shoulder. The crowd of children gasped. One girl even clapped. Cassidy watched from the barn doorway, arms folded, eyes a little shiny. Emma stood beside her, holding a clipboard, but not looking at it. She didn't need to anymore. She just watched the two of them, boy and horse, and let herself feel what she hadn't allowed herself to in years. A kind of healing that had no name. After the kids left, Eli helped walk Hope to the east field. It had been fenced off for months, just reseeded. New ground, fresh start. Joe Turner waited at the gate with 2 cold sodas and a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in wax paper. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, handing it over. Eli took it with a small smile, still silent. Joe gave Hope a nod. "You're looking good, horse." Hope blinked slowly, as if to agree. They stood there together for a while, 3 generations of men, one with hooves, 2 with boots. "I heard someone say that horse had no future," Joe said after a bit. "Glad they were wrong." Eli nodded, chewing slowly. He pointed toward the field. "I want to try," he said quietly. Joe's brow lifted. "Try what, bud?" "Riding him." The words came out slower than most folks talked, but clearer than Eli had managed in years. Joe didn't answer right away. He looked at the horse, then at the boy. "You trust him?" Eli nodded. "That's all I need." They didn't use a saddle, just a bareback pad and a loose rope. Emma stood near the fence with Cassidy and 3 other volunteers from the sanctuary. No one spoke. Hope didn't flinch as Eli climbed up, didn't shift, didn't bolt. He simply waited. Eli leaned forward and whispered something no one else could hear. Hope took a step, then another. Then, at a steady walk, they moved together across the field. The breeze picked up, tugging at Eli's shirt and lifting his hat slightly. His legs tightened, his back straightened. And for a moment he looked like he'd been born on horseback. Halfway across the pasture, Hope broke into a trot, still smooth, still quiet. Eli let out a sound, a soft laugh, and leaned into it. Cassidy felt the breath leave her chest. Emma covered her mouth. Joe watched without moving, but his hand tightened on the fence rail. Hope kept going. Into a lope now, the kind of run that feels more like flying than galloping. The boy on his back didn't try to steer, he just trusted. When they finally slowed and turned back, Eli slid down and wrapped his arms around the horse's neck. "You did good," he whispered. Hope nickered softly. That night they lit a small fire pit out back. The stars above Red Willow were so many they blurred into each other like spilled sugar. Cassidy passed around hot chocolate. Emma brought out an old photo album. And Joe, who rarely told stories, talked about Eli's dad, about how he'd loved Mustangs, how he used to sketch them in the margins of his mechanic's invoices. He said once, Joe murmured, poking the fire, that wild horses weren't wild because they ran. They were wild because they chose not to be broken. Eli looked at Hope. The horse stood just beyond the firelight, grazing quietly, still close. "I don't want to call him Echo anymore," the boy said suddenly. Everyone turned. "I mean, that was his name. But now he's different. He's still him, but not." Emma nodded. "You thinking of a new name?" Eli hesitated, then said, "Hope." The name hung in the air for a moment. Then Cassidy smiled. "That fits." Joe grunted. "Better than number 17A." They all laughed. Hope looked up then, ears flicking toward the fire, as if he knew they were talking about him. Maybe he did. In the weeks that followed, more kids came to the sanctuary. Some with speech delays, some with anxiety, some with nothing more than a quiet ache in their chest that no one had seen. Eli took the lead without being asked. He showed them how to move slow, how to breathe steady, how to let a horse come to you on its own time. Hope walked beside them all, gentle and quiet, always watching Eli. And so the story spread, not because someone told it loud, but because it mattered. People whispered about the Mustang who was almost killed, about the boy who had nothing and gave everything, about a town that remembered what it meant to care. And long after the news vans were gone, long after the fence was repaired and the barn got a fresh coat of paint, there were still moments, small ones. Like when Eli led Hope to the ridge at sunset and they stood together, silhouettes against a sky gone gold. No ropes, no reins, just wind and trust and something no one could name but everyone could feel. If this story touched your heart even just a little, drop a 1 in the comments to let us know you're here, or type 0U if it made you speechless like it did for us. Sometimes it only takes one moment to change everything. And if you want more true stories like this, about quiet courage, second chances, and the unbreakable bond between people and animals, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. We've got more coming, and trust me, you won't want to miss the next one.